She kept receiving gifts from an unknown person. Is he a secret admirer or something more sinister? A young woman keeps finding gifts on her doorstep. No name, no note, no explanation. First, it's her favorite candy from childhood, something no one should remember. Then, it's a song from the worst year of her life. Then, it's a necklace that vanished the day her future was destroyed. This isn't kindness. This is someone who knows her past better than anyone should. So she starts to panic. Is someone watching her? Is someone trying to control her? Or is someone trying to say sorry for something unforgivable? Then she finds the truth. The sender isn't a stranger. He's the man who accidentally ruined her life and never had the courage to admit it. But now he's dying. And these gifts are not about love. They're about guilt. And just when she thinks it's over, she learns another innocent person is about to be hurt the same way. So the real question is, will she stay silent and protect her peace, or risk everything to stop the past from destroying another life? Because sometimes forgiveness heals you, but sometimes the truth saves someone else. So what will she choose, peace or justice? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Also, let us know in the comments what stories would you like us to write about. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maribel's small front porch as she trudged up the cracked concrete steps. Her feet ached from another 12-hour shift of walking the hospital's endless corridors, delivering patient files and organizing records. The weight of manila folders and the hum of fluorescent lights still clung to her like a second skin. She noticed the package immediately. A plain brown box, no bigger than her hand, sitting precisely centered on her welcome mat. No shipping label, no markings of any kind. Just a simple box that seemed to be waiting for her. Maribel's keys jingled softly as she bent to pick it up. It was lightweight, almost empty feeling. She glanced around the quiet street, where the neighbor's cat watched her lazily from a nearby fence post, and children's bikes lay scattered in driveways. Nothing seemed out of place, yet something about the box made her pulse quicken. Inside her duplex, Maribel set her heavy work bag down and sank into her favorite armchair, the box balanced on her knees. The living room's familiar comfort, her grandmother's quilt draped over the couch, family photos arranged carefully on the walls, did little to ease the strange tension building in her chest. With careful fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside lay a small plastic bag tied with a red ribbon, and beneath it, a plain white card. The moment she saw what was in the bag, her breath caught sharply in her throat. Strawberry drops. The same pink-wrapped candies she'd treasured as a little girl, each one shaped like a perfect tiny strawberry. The same brand that had disappeared from store shelves over 20 years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the bag, memories washing over her with unexpected force. "How?" she whispered to her empty living room. The plastic crinkled as she turned the bag over, examining every detail. They were authentic, not some similar candy, but the exact ones she remembered. The ones her grandfather would bring home every Friday after work, presenting them to her with a flourish that made each candy feel like a precious gem. The card beneath contained no clue to the sender's identity, just blank white paper, heavyweight and expensive feeling, but completely empty of words or signature. Maribel set it down and closed her eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by memories she'd carefully packed away years ago. She was 8 years old again, sitting on her grandfather's knee while he told stories of his youth. The sweet strawberry candy dissolving on her tongue. She could smell his old spice aftershave, hear his deep laugh, feel the scratch of his wool sweater against her cheek. The day he died, she'd had 2 pieces of the candy left. She'd kept them in a jewelry box until high school, unable to bear eating the last connection to those precious moments. Maribel opened her eyes, finding them damp with unexpected tears. She'd never told anyone about the significance of these candies, not her college roommates, not her co-workers, not even her closest friends. It had felt too private, too precious to share. The memory of her grandfather was something she'd guarded carefully, along with the pain of losing him. Rising from her chair, she paced the small living room, the bag of candy still clutched in her hand. The setting sun painted her walls in shades of amber and rose, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced through possibilities. Who could have known? Who would have gone to the trouble of finding these discontinued candies and leaving them anonymously at her door? The mystery of it scraped against old wounds she'd thought long healed. Her grandfather's death had come during her senior year of high school, just as she was preparing college applications. The grief had derailed her carefully laid plans, leading to missed deadlines and a lost scholarship opportunity. She'd eventually found her way to her current job, stable, predictable work that let her help others in small ways. But the what-ifs of that time still haunted her quiet moments. Maribel sank onto her couch, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from her walls. The candy bag sat in her lap, a tangible link to a past she'd tried so hard to move beyond. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to reject this uninvited disruption of her carefully maintained emotional equilibrium. But her fingers wouldn't release their grip on the bag. Instead, she found herself reaching inside, unwrapping a single piece with the same deliberate care she'd shown as a child, trying to make them last. The familiar shape felt both foreign and achingly familiar against her palm. The sweet strawberry scent brought fresh tears to her eyes. As darkness settled over her small living room, Maribel sat in the growing shadows, turning the wrapped candies over in her hands. Each one was a key unlocking memories she'd stored away. Summer afternoons reading books with her grandfather, his patient voice helping her sound out difficult words. Winter evenings by the fireplace, learning to play chess while savoring a single piece of candy throughout the entire game. The last time he'd given her the treats, just days before the stroke that took him away forever. The silence of her home seemed to amplify the rustle of candy wrappers as she examined each piece, as if searching for answers in their familiar pink packaging. But no explanation presented itself, only questions that stirred up the sediment of old grief she'd thought safely settled at the bottom of her heart. The morning sun streamed through the hospital's fluorescent-lit corridors as Maribel made her way to the records department. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unlocked the office door, her mind still fixed on the mysterious package from yesterday. The familiar strawberry candy wrapper kept appearing in her thoughts, like a persistent echo she couldn't silence. She tried to focus on her work, organizing patient files and entering data into the computer system, but her usual methodical approach felt scattered. Several times she caught herself staring at the same file for minutes, not really seeing the words on the page. By lunchtime, the weight of her unease had grown too heavy to bear alone. Maribel gathered her brown paper lunch bag and made her way to the break room, hoping to find Laverne there. The older nurse had always been a steady presence since Maribel started working at the hospital 3 years ago, offering quiet wisdom and genuine care that made the workplace feel more like home. Sure enough, Laverne sat at her usual corner table, a steaming cup of tea beside her crossword puzzle. She looked up as Maribel entered, her warm brown eyes crinkling with concern at the sight of Maribel's troubled expression. "Child, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on those shoulders," Laverne said, setting down her pen. "Come sit with me and tell me what's bothering you." Maribel slid into the chair across from Laverne, her lunch forgotten. "Something weird happened yesterday," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone left a package on my doorstep." A package? Laverne leaned forward, her full attention on Maribel. It had these strawberry candies inside. Maribel's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. The kind I used to eat when I was little, but here's the thing. They stopped making them years ago. And I've never told anyone here about them. Not a single person. Laverne's expression grew thoughtful. Was there a note? Anything to say who it's from? Just a blank card. Maribel shook her head. No name, no message, nothing. The break room buzzed with the quiet conversations of other hospital staff, but in their corner, a pocket of concerned silence formed between the two women. Laverne took a slow sip of her tea, considering her response carefully. Now, I understand why you're unsettled, Laverne said finally, her voice gentle but firm. Someone knowing something so personal about you, especially something from your childhood, that's bound to shake anyone up. Maribel nodded, relieved that Laverne understood. I keep trying to think who could know about those candies. My family moved around so much when I was young, and I lost touch with most people from back then. Listen to me. Laverne reached across the table and patted Maribel's hand. We don't want to jump to conclusions, but we don't want to be naive either. Sometimes people reach out from the past with good intentions, maybe trying to reconnect in their own way. But they don't always think about how their actions might affect others. So you think I shouldn't worry too much? Maribel asked, seeking reassurance in Laverne's steady gaze. I think you should stay alert and trust your instincts, Laverne replied carefully. Maybe this is just someone being thoughtful in an awkward way. But there's nothing wrong with being cautious. You might want to let your neighbors know to keep an eye out, maybe get a security camera for your porch. The rest of the workday passed in a blur of medical records and filing, but Laverne's words helped Maribel maintain some semblance of calm. As she drove home in the early evening, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, usually her favorite time of day. Today, however, her stomach tightened as she turned onto her street. From halfway down the block she could see it, another package sitting innocently on her front step. Maribel parked her car but remained sitting there, hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared at the small brown box. After several deep breaths, she forced herself to get out and approach her door. This package was lighter than yesterday's, and something shifted inside as she picked it up. With trembling fingers, she carried it into her house, setting it on the kitchen counter while she turned on all the lights, trying to chase away the growing shadows. When she finally opened it, she found a CD case inside. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the handwritten label, Time Stands Still, Sarah McLachlan. The world seemed to tilt sideways as memories flooded back. Endless nights spent listening to this song on repeat, tears falling onto college rejection letters, dreams crumbling like the walls of her childhood home. That song had been her anthem during the worst year of her life, when the scholarship she'd counted on disappeared due to a filing error she couldn't fight. She'd played it over and over in her tiny bedroom, trying to find comfort in the melancholy lyrics while watching her carefully planned future slip away. Maribel sank into a kitchen chair, the CD clutched in her hands as the weight of the past pressed down on her. She'd never told anyone about this song either, about how it had become both a comfort and a reminder of everything she'd lost. Yet here it was, another piece of her private history delivered by an unknown hand, forcing her to remember things she'd worked so hard to move past. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking time as Maribel sat there, caught between past and present, wondering who could possibly know these intimate details of her life. Laverne's earlier words about staying cautious echoed in her mind, but they provided little comfort now. This wasn't just about candy anymore. This was someone who knew exactly where to find her old wounds. Maribel sat in her small living room, the burned CD trembling slightly in her hands. The silver disc caught the warm light from her reading lamp, creating tiny rainbows that danced across her coffee table. She hadn't heard this song in years, hadn't allowed herself to hear it. Taking a deep breath, she pushed herself up from her worn but comfortable armchair and walked to the old CD player on her bookshelf. Her fingers moved automatically, muscle memory from a time when CDs were still the main way people listened to music. The player's mechanism whirred to life with a familiar hum. Maribel stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself as the first notes filled the room. The melody hit her like a physical force. Her knees weakened and she sank back into a chair. The song had been everywhere that year, playing in stores, in cars, on the radio. It had been the soundtrack to what should have been her triumph, right up until it became the background music to her downfall. Memories crashed over her like waves. The dean's office, with its heavy wooden desk and leather chairs that had made her feel small. The formal letterhead on the complaint. Words that burned themselves into her memory. Breach of academic integrity. Violation of conduct. Immediate suspension pending investigation. All lies. Every single word had been a lie, but they hadn't listened. They hadn't wanted to listen. Maribel's hands clenched into fists as she remembered sitting in that office, trying to maintain her composure while explaining that she had never cheated, had never helped others cheat, had never sold answer keys as accused. Her voice had shaken, but she'd held firm to the truth. It hadn't mattered. The scholarship committee had already made their decision. The song's chorus swelled, and Maribel felt her throat tighten. She could still feel the weight of her packed boxes as she'd moved out of her dorm room, the pitying looks from students who'd heard rumors, but never the truth. The scholarship had been her only chance at staying in school. Without it, her carefully planned future had crumbled like a house of cards. "Who are you?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible over the music. "Why now?" The familiar fear began creeping in. The same fear she'd felt when reading those accusations, when realizing no one would believe her side of the story. But this time, it was different. This time, the fear had teeth. Someone out there knew not just about her childhood candy preference, but about this specific moment in her life. Someone was watching, remembering, sending messages that cut straight to her core. Maribel jumped up, suddenly unable to sit still. She moved to the front window, pulling the blinds shut with sharp, decisive movements. The soft swoosh of the blinds closing couldn't drown out the song that still played, couldn't stop the memories that kept coming. She moved through her house methodically, checking each window, drawing every blind. Her hands shook as she tested the back door's lock, then double-checked it. The deadbolt on the front door. Was it always this loose? She tested it 3 times, her heart pounding against her ribs. The song ended, leaving the house in silence. Maribel stood in her hallway, listening to the quiet, trying to hear any sound that didn't belong. The usual creaks and settling noises of her old duplex seemed suddenly sinister. Was that a footstep outside, or just the neighbor's cat? Was that shadow by the kitchen window just a tree branch, or something else? Her phone buzzed, making her jump. It was a text from Laverne. "Everything okay, honey? You seemed off today." Maribel's fingers hovered over the keys. How could she explain this? That someone who knew about one of the worst moments of her life was suddenly reaching into her present. That every shadow in her house suddenly felt threatening. She typed back a quick, "I'm fine, just tired," and headed to her bedroom. But even there, she couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. She checked her closet, looked under her bed, pulled her curtains tight. Her usual bedtime routine felt hollow, mechanical. Each creak of the house made her pause, listen, hold her breath. When she finally lay down, sleep refused to come. She stared at her ceiling, watching headlights from passing cars create moving patterns in the darkness. Her mind kept circling back to that year, to the faces of the people who had been there. Who among them would do this? Who would wait all these years only to send such specific reminders? The digital clock on her nightstand clicked over to 2 in the morning, then 3, then 4. Maribel dozed fitfully, starting awake at every sound. Her dreams, when they came, were filled with unopened packages, with accusatory letters, with a nameless figure always just out of sight. As the first grey light of dawn began to seep through her curtains, Maribel gave up on sleep entirely. She sat up in bed, exhausted but too anxious to rest. The CD still sat in her player, innocent-looking in the early morning light, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest and watched the sun slowly rise, wondering what package might be waiting for her when she got home from work, wondering whose ghost from her past had decided to haunt her present. Maribel sat at her desk, trying to focus on the medical records that needed filing, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and her heart jumped every time someone walked past. She hadn't slept well the night before. The music from that CD had brought back too many memories, too much pain. A white delivery van crawled down the street, moving slower than usual. Maribel's hands froze over her keyboard as she watched it through the window. The van stopped about 3 houses down, but from her angle, she couldn't see who stepped out. She held her breath, counting the seconds, willing herself to turn, back to her work. But she couldn't. After what felt like forever, the van pulled away. Maribel's shoulders slumped with relief, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't go away. She glanced at the clock. Her shift would end in 20 minutes. 20 long minutes of wondering what might be waiting at her door. When she finally left work, her feet dragged on the short walk to her front door. There it was. Another package, small and innocent-looking on her welcome mat. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was lighter than the others, wrapped in the same brown paper, with no return address. Inside her house, Maribel locked the door behind her and sank onto her couch. The package sat in her lap like a ticking bomb. She unwrapped it slowly, carefully, as if it might break. Inside was a dark blue velvet jewelry box, the kind that expensive necklaces come in. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." But it was. When she opened the box, her chest tightened so hard she could barely breathe. Delicate silver chain held a small pearl pendant, exactly like the one she'd lost years ago. The one that disappeared the same day everything fell apart. She remembered that day with painful clarity. The necklace had been a graduation gift from her grandmother. She'd worn it to the meeting where they told her about the complaint, where they said her scholarship was being revoked. She'd touched it for comfort while they spoke, and later that night she noticed it was gone. Just like her dreams of college, just like her carefully planned future. Vanished without a trace. Maribel set the box down with shaking hands. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. This wasn't some secret admirer or well-meaning friend. Whoever was sending these gifts knew exactly what they were doing. They knew about the candy from her childhood, about the song that had been her comfort during the worst time of her life, and now this, the necklace that symbolized everything she'd lost. She got up and checked all, her windows, making sure they were locked. Drew all the curtains closed, checked the back door twice. But it wasn't enough. The feeling of being watched, of being known, crawled under her skin like tiny spiders. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, and she stared at it for a long moment. She'd saved the number months ago, after Laverne mentioned him, Roland Merrick, a private investigator who specialized in discreet investigations. She'd saved it just in case, never thinking she'd need it. Now, sitting in a dimly lit kitchen, Maribel picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over the number. Was she overreacting? Maybe. But these gifts weren't random. They were specific, personal, tied to memories that still hurt. Whoever was sending them knew too much about her past, about her pain. She pressed the call button before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang 3 times before a calm, professional voice answered. Merrick Investigations. Hello? Maribel said, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. My name is Maribel Ainsworth. I need help finding out who's been leaving packages at my door. Can you tell me more about these packages? Roland Merrick's voice was steady, grounding. Maribel took a deep breath and explained about the candy, the CD, and now the necklace. As she spoke, the words tumbled out faster, her fear becoming more real as she shared it. Each gift connects to a specific time in my past, she finished. Times that nobody here knows about. I'm scared because whoever's sending them knows things about me that I've never told anyone. There was a thoughtful pause on the other end. I understand your concern, Ms. Ainsworth. This kind of targeted behavior is unsettling. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow? We can discuss this in detail and determine the best course of action. They set up an appointment for the next morning. After hanging up, Maribel felt both relieved and anxious. Taking action helped, but now she had to face something she'd been avoiding for years, the truth about what had happened back then, and who might still be holding on to it now. She spent the rest of the evening in her living room, the TV on but muted, jumping at every sound from outside. The jewelry box sat closed on her coffee table, both familiar and threatening. She couldn't bring herself to touch it again, but she couldn't ignore it either. Like the memories it represented, it demanded to be acknowledged, refused to stay buried in the past where she'd tried to leave it. The morning sun cast long shadows through the blinds as Maribel sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee. Her phone displayed Roland Merrick's number, and she took a deep breath before dialing. After just 2 rings, his calm, professional voice answered. Ms. Ainsworth, I've completed the initial investigation into your deliveries, Roland said. His tone was measured, revealing neither concern nor relief. Maribel's fingers tightened around the mug. What did you find? The packages are being sent through MediExpress couriers, Roland explained. It's a specialized medical delivery service that primarily works with hospitals and healthcare facilities. Maribel frowned, her brow furrowing. A medical courier? I don't understand. Here's where it gets interesting, Roland continued. The deliveries are being paid for through a hospital trust account, specifically one connected to Riverside Hospice Center on the other side of town. The tension in Maribel's shoulders began to ease slightly. A hospice center? Yes, the account is anonymous, but it's definitely coming from someone inside the facility. This isn't someone watching your house or following you, Ms. Ainsworth. Whoever is sending these gifts is likely confined to a hospital bed. Maribel sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The fear that had been building in her chest for days began to dissolve, replaced by a different kind of heaviness. That changes things, doesn't it? She said quietly. Considerably. Roland agreed. Would you like me to dig deeper? I could try to identify the specific patient. No. Maribel interrupted, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. No, I think I need to process this first. After ending the call, Maribel spent the rest of her day at work trying to reconcile this new information with her fears. The strawberry candies, the meaningful song, the missing necklace, these weren't threats from a stalker, but messages from someone who seemed to know her past intimately. Someone who was now facing the end of their life. The autumn day faded into evening as Maribel drove home, streetlights flickering on one by one. Her headlights caught the shape of a Medi-Express van turning the corner at the end of her street. This time, instead of fear, she felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. Sure enough, a small package waited on her doorstep. Unlike the previous deliveries, this one was simply a white envelope, unsealed. Maribel's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up and carried it inside. She settled onto her couch, the envelope light in her hands. The living room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of traffic. Taking a deep breath, Maribel opened the envelope and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. The message was brief, written in an unsteady hand. "I never had the courage to apologize. Time is running out." Maribel read the words over and over, her vision blurring with unexpected tears. The paper crinkled slightly in her grip as memories washed over her. The scholarship she'd lost, the dreams that had crumbled, the years she'd spent trying to rebuild her life from the ashes of false accusations. But now, instead of the anger and hurt she'd carried for so long, she felt something else stirring in her heart. Somewhere in a hospice bed across town lay someone who had been carrying their own burden, the weight of an unspoken apology, a wrong they'd never made right. Someone who was now facing their final days and reaching out in the only way they could, trying to make amends before it was too late. The gifts weren't meant to frighten her. They were messages in bottles, cast out in hope of redemption. Each one had been carefully chosen to show that the sender knew exactly what they had taken from her. The strawberry candies from her childhood, proof of how long they'd known her. The song that had been her constant companion during that difficult time, acknowledging the pain she'd endured. The necklace, an exact replica of what was lost, showing they remembered every detail of what had happened. Maribel wiped her eyes and carefully folded the letter, placing it back in its envelope. The fear that had kept her checking locks and closing blinds had transformed into something else, a bittersweet. Understanding that someone who had once caused her great pain was now reaching out, not to harm her again, but to seek forgiveness before their time ran out. She glanced at her phone, considering calling Roland back to ask him to identify the sender after all. But something held her back. The anonymous nature of these gifts had shifted from threatening to almost gentle, like someone knocking softly at a door, waiting to be invited in rather than forcing their way through. In the quiet of her living room, Maribel sat with this new understanding, feeling the sharp edges of old wounds begin to soften. The sender wasn't a stranger seeking control. They were a familiar ghost from her past, seeking peace for them both before crossing a final threshold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Maribel pulled her worn Honda Civic into a visitor's space. She sat motionless behind the wheel, her fingers wrapped tightly around her purse where the letter and necklace lay hidden. The brick building loomed before her, its windows reflecting the early light like dozens of watchful eyes. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she read the sign. Pine Grove Hospice Center. The fear that had gripped her over the past few days had transformed into a different kind of anxiety. Someone from her past was waiting inside, someone who had changed the course of her life. Taking a deep breath, Maribel stepped out of her car. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of pine from the surrounding trees. Her sensible work shoes clicked against the pavement as she walked toward the entrance, each step measured and deliberate. Inside, the reception area was quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the gentle tapping of computer keys. The walls were painted in soothing shades of green, and landscape paintings hung at carefully measured intervals. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from behind the desk. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle in the hushed atmosphere. Maribel's throat felt dry. Yes, I'm here to see Walter Grisham. The receptionist's expression softened with understanding. Of course. Room 215. She pointed toward a hallway to the right. Just follow the blue line on the floor. As Maribel walked down the corridor, she noticed how the industrial carpet muffled her footsteps. The air smelled of disinfectant and something else. Something that reminded her of sadness and waiting. She passed several rooms with half-closed doors, glimpsing fragments of other lives, a vase of wilting flowers, a television playing quietly, an empty wheelchair. Room 215 had a small window in the door. Maribel paused, her hand resting on the cool metal handle. Through the glass, she could see an elderly man propped up in bed, his thin frame barely making a dent in the white sheets. Medical equipment blinked silently beside him, and a morning news program played on a wall-mounted TV with the volume turned low. Her fingers tightened around her purse as she pushed the door open. The man in the bed turned his head at the sound, and their eyes met. Walter Grisham's face was deeply lined, his skin pale and papery, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Recognition flashed across his features, followed immediately by a mix of shame and relief that made Maribel's chest tighten. "Miss Ainsworth," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He tried to sit up straighter, his hands trembling as they gripped the bed rail. "I wasn't sure you would come." Maribel stood just inside the doorway, uncertain whether to move closer. "The private investigator found your courier service," she said quietly. Walter nodded, his thin shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry for frightening you with the anonymous gifts. He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't have the courage to reach out directly. I wasn't sure you would want to hear from me after everything." The morning sunlight streaming through the window caught the dust motes in the air between them, making them dance like tiny stars. Maribel took a few steps forward, close enough now to see the oxygen tube running beneath his nose, the IV line disappearing into his arm. "I've thought about you so many times over the years," Walter continued, his voice growing stronger with urgency. "What I did, what I failed to do, it's haunted me. I knew the complaint against you was false. I had evidence that would have cleared your name, but I was worried about the university's reputation, about my position." His hands twisted in the thin blanket. "I chose the easy path instead of the right one, and I destroyed your future." Maribel's legs felt weak. She sank into the visitor's chair beside his bed, her purse heavy in her lap. The necklace inside seemed to burn through the fabric, a physical reminder of all she had lost. "Why now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Why send these things?" Walter's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm dying," he said simply. "And I couldn't bear to take this guilt to my grave without at least trying to make it right." He gestured weakly toward a side table where a familiar box of strawberry candies sat. "I remembered how you always had those during study sessions. And the song, you used to hum it in the hallways. The necklace." His voice broke. "I found it in the office after everything happened. I should have returned it then, should have spoken up, should have done so many things differently." The room fell quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the muted voices from the TV. Maribel looked at the man before her, not the powerful administrator who had once held her future in his hands, but a frail human being trying to make peace with his mistakes before time ran out. "I was 19, she said softly. "I had worked so hard for that scholarship. When it was taken away, when no one would listen to my side." She had to pause, surprised by how raw the pain still felt after all these years. "It changed everything." "I know," Walter whispered. His eyes were filled with a deep, honest remorse that made him look even more fragile. I can't give you back those years, Miss Ainsworth. I can't undo what I did. But I want you to know the truth. I want to apologize while I still can. You deserved so much better. The room seemed to grow smaller, more intimate, as the weight of his words settled between them. Outside the window, a bird landed on the sill, peered in for a moment, then flew away. Maribel watched it go, thinking about paths taken and paths forever closed, about the power of choices and the long shadows they cast. The private hospice room was painted a soft sage green, but the natural light streaming through gauzy curtains did little to brighten the clinical space. Medical equipment beeped steadily in the background as Maribel stood in the doorway, her purse clutched tightly against her side. The frail man in the bed seemed to shrink further into his pillows when their eyes met. Walter Grisham's hands trembled as he reached for a cup of water on the bedside table. His skin was paper-thin, mapped with age spots and medical tape residue from previous IVs. "Miss Ainsworth," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Maribel remained near the doorway, her heart pounding. This man was nothing like the commanding administrator she remembered from 12 years ago. Time and illness had worn him down to shadows and sharp angles. "The gifts," she said, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. "They were all from you." Walter nodded slowly, setting the water cup down with extreme care. "Please." He gestured to a chair beside the bed. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I hope you'll let me explain." Maribel hesitated before moving to the chair. She sat stiffly, her purse still clutched close like armor. The necklace inside felt heavy, with memories. "I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times," Walter began, his breathing labored between words. "But now that you're here, I hardly know where to start." He paused, gathering strength. "I suppose the simplest truth is this: I failed you, completely and inexcusably." Maribel's throat tightened as years of buried pain threatened to surface. "The complaint," she said. "The one that cost me everything." "Yes." Walter's face crumpled with shame. "I was the administrator responsible for reviewing that case. The allegations should have been thoroughly investigated. Instead, I simply filed the paperwork, marked it resolved, moved on to the next task." His admission hung in the air between them. Maribel's hands clenched in her lap as she remembered the day she'd learned her scholarship was revoked. The confusion, the humiliation, the helplessness. "It wasn't just negligence," Walter continued, his voice growing hoarse. "It was cowardice. The complaint came from an influential donor's child. Investigating it properly would have meant confrontation, possible scandal. I took the path of least resistance." He closed his eyes briefly. "I told myself it was just one student, one scholarship, but I knew better. I knew what dreams I was destroying." Maribel felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Did you ever learn the truth? That the allegations were false?" "Yes," Walter whispered. "Months later, long after the damage was done, the student who filed the complaint admitted to fabricating the story out of jealousy. But by then," he gestured weakly, "you were gone. Your recommendations withdrawn. Your academic record marked with that black spot." The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between them. Outside the room, nurses' shoes squeaked on linoleum as they made their rounds. "I've carried this guilt for 12 years, Walter said. "Watched your name in local news sometimes. Small mentions of community, service, volunteer work at the hospital. I saw how you rebuilt your life, but I never stopped knowing what I'd taken from you." His breathing grew more labored, and he reached for the oxygen tube near his pillow, adjusting it with shaking fingers. "The doctors gave me 6 months," Maybe less. He gave a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. Nothing like death to force you to face your cowardice. I had to try to make it right, or at least acknowledge the wrong I'd done. Maribel found her voice. The strawberry candies. From the vending machine in the administration building. You used to buy them between classes. The music, the necklace. I remembered everything about that time, every detail of what I destroyed. Walter's eyes filled with tears. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Miss Ainsworth. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that someone remembered. Someone knew the truth. Someone was sorry. The weight of 12 years pressed down on Maribel's shoulders. She thought of all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering what she'd done wrong, all the times she'd doubted herself, questioned her memories, carried the shame of accusations she'd never even fully understood. It changed everything. She said quietly, my whole life path, my confidence, my trust in systems and authority. She met his gaze directly. Do you know what it's like to have your character attacked and never even get the chance to defend yourself? Walter's face crumpled. No, I don't. And that's what makes my failure even worse. I was entrusted with protecting students' rights, their futures. Instead, I became part of a system that silenced and dismissed them. His hands twisted in the thin hospital blanket. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back those years or those opportunities. All I can offer is the truth, and my deepest remorse. The silence in the hospice room felt heavy with years of unspoken pain. Maribel's hands trembled as she gripped the arms of the vinyl chair beside Walter Grisham's bed. The steady beep of medical monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop to the moment she had never expected to face. You don't know, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know what it did to me. The words caught in her throat, thick with emotion. I had dreams, big dreams. I was going to be a doctor. Walter's pale face crumpled with shame, but he kept his eyes fixed on her, accepting every word. That scholarship was everything to me, Maribel continued, her voice growing stronger. My mama worked 2 jobs to get me through high school. We didn't have connections or money or anything except my grades and my determination. And then... She pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. One day it was all gone, just gone. The afternoon sun streamed through the window blinds, casting striped shadows across the hospital bed. Maribel stood up, needing to move, to release the energy building inside her. Do you know what it's like to have no one believe you? To know you're telling the truth, but it doesn't matter? Her voice cracked. I kept thinking someone would listen, someone would check, someone would care enough to look deeper. She turned to face Walter, tears now flowing freely. But no one did. Walter's thin shoulders shook with silent sobs, but he didn't try to defend himself or look away from her pain. I worked so hard to rebuild, Maribel said, pacing the small room. Got my associate's degree taking night classes, found a decent job, made a life that's... okay. She stopped, gripping the foot of the bed. But there's always this voice inside me wondering what could have been. Every time I file papers at the hospital, every time I see young doctors doing their rounds, I think, that could have been me. The weight of lost possibilities filled the room. Outside, a cart wheeled past in the hallway, and voices drifted in muffled through the door. But in this space, time seemed suspended between past and present. The worst part wasn't even losing the scholarship, Maribel said softly. It was feeling so small, so powerless, like I didn't matter enough for anyone to fight for me. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was 19 years old and I learned that justice isn't always just. Walter reached for a tissue from the bedside table, his movements slow and pained. "You did matter," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You mattered so much, and I failed you completely, not just in my job, but as a human being who should have cared more, looked closer, done better." Maribel returned to her chair, suddenly exhausted. The anger that had fueled her for so long felt different now, faced with this frail man who had carried his own burden of regret. "I've imagined this moment so many times," she admitted. "What I'd say if I ever met the person who ruined my dreams. Sometimes I imagined screaming, sometimes crying, sometimes just walking away." She took a deep breath. "But now that I'm here, I realize something." Walter waited, his lined face open and vulnerable. "Holding on to this pain, it's like drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. It's only hurting me." Maribel reached for her purse and pulled out the necklace he had sent. "You can't give me back those years or that opportunity, but you can have this burden of anger I've been carrying. I don't want it anymore." Fresh tears spilled down Walter's cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Maribel agreed quietly. "But I deserve peace. And somehow, seeing you here, knowing you carried this regret all these years too, it helps. Not because it makes it right, but because it makes it real. My pain was seen. My story was heard." Walter nodded, unable to speak through his tears. "So I forgive you," Maribel said, surprised at how steady her voice was. "Not to excuse what happened, but to free myself from letting it define my future." The monitors beeped steadily in the background as they sat together, sharing the weight of this moment. Finally, Walter cleared his throat. Would you pray with me?" he asked hesitantly. "I know I have no right to ask, but—" Maribel looked at his outstretched hand, weathered and spotted with age, trembling slightly in the air between them. After a moment she reached out and took it. "Dear Lord," Walter began, his voice quavering. "Thank you for bringing Maribel here today, for giving me the chance to face my failures and ask for forgiveness. Thank you for her strength and her grace." As they prayed together, Maribel felt something shift inside her, like a knot slowly unraveling. The late afternoon sun wrapped them both in gentle warmth, and in that quiet room, two souls found a measure of peace in finally speaking their truth. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospice parking lot as Maribel walked slowly to her car. Her legs felt heavy, her eyes were puffy from crying, but her heart felt different. The weight she'd carried for years had shifted somehow, like a backpack finally set down after a long journey. She sat in her car for several minutes, hands resting limply on the steering wheel, watching the golden light play across the dashboard. The conversation with Walter Grisham kept replaying in her mind, his trembling voice, his genuine remorse, the way his weathered hands had clasped hers during their prayer together. It was nothing like the confrontation she'd imagined all these years. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, closing her eyes briefly. "Thank you for giving me strength to forgive." The drive home seemed to pass in a blur. Maribel noticed little things with new clarity. Children playing in their front yards, an elderly couple walking hand in hand, a woman watering her garden. Simple moments of life continuing on, just as hers would now. At home, Maribel kicked off her shoes and curled up on her favorite armchair, feeling emotionally spent, but peaceful. She hadn't realized how much energy it took to carry all that hurt and anger. Her muscles actually felt looser, like she'd just had a massage. She was about to heat up some leftover soup for dinner when her phone rang. Laverne's name lit up the screen. "Hey there," Maribel answered, smiling at the familiar voice of her friend and mentor. But Laverne's usual warm tone was replaced with something more urgent. Maribel, honey, I need to talk to you about something that's been weighing on my mind all day. It's about one of our nursing students. Maribel sat up straighter, noting the worry in Laverne's voice. What's going on? There's this young lady, Talia Monroe. Bright girl, works so hard. Reminds me a lot of you, actually. Laverne paused, and Maribel could hear her taking a deep breath. She's facing expulsion from the program, and something about it just isn't sitting right with me. Maribel's stomach tightened. What happened? According to the paperwork, there was a complaint filed about her conduct during clinical rotations. But Talia swears she never did what they're accusing her of, and I believe her. The girl's got integrity written all over her face. Laverne's voice grew more frustrated. But the administration isn't even giving her a proper chance to defend herself. They're just pushing her out. Maribel's hands began to shake. The soup she'd been planning to heat up was forgotten as memories flooded back. Not the distant ones from her meeting with Walter Grisham, but sharp, painful ones of confusion and helplessness as her own dreams slipped away. They're not reviewing the complaint properly? Maribel's voice came out barely above a whisper. No, they're not. It's all being handled through internal memos and closed-door meetings. Poor girl doesn't even know who filed the complaint. Laverne sighed heavily. When I heard the details, I couldn't help thinking about what you told me about your own experience. The similarities are, well, they're scary. Maribel stood up and began pacing her living room, her bare feet pressing into the carpet with each step. The same process, she said, more to herself than to Laverne. The same broken system. Exactly. Laverne agreed. And Talia, this girl has worked so hard to get here. Single mama, working part-time while studying, doing everything right. Just like you were. Maribel stopped at her window, staring out at the darkening sky. Her conversation with Walter Grisham echoed in her mind, his admission that the system had failed, that his negligence had allowed injustice to happen. And now, years later, nothing had changed. How long ago was the complaint filed? Maribel asked, her voice stronger now. Just last week. They're moving fast, trying to push her out before the next term starts. Laverne paused. I know this might be a lot to ask, especially after everything you've been through, but I wondered if maybe you'd be willing to talk to her. She's feeling so alone right now. Maribel closed her eyes, remembering that feeling of isolation, of being silenced. The peace she'd felt after forgiving Walter Grisham was still there, but now it was joined by something else, a sense of purpose, a clarity about what needed to be done. Yes, she said firmly. I'll talk to her. But Laverne, I think we need to do more than just talk. The system that hurt me is still hurting others. Nothing's changed. What are you thinking? Laverne asked, and Maribel could hear the hope in her voice. I'm thinking it's time to stop this from happening to anyone else. Walter Grisham's apology matters, but it's not enough if the same mistakes keep being made. Maribel's voice grew stronger with each word. Can you arrange a meeting with Talia? Tomorrow, if possible? I'll call her right now, Laverne said. She's been spending most evenings in the hospital library, trying to figure out what to do. I'm sure she'll meet with you. As they finished their conversation and said goodbye. Maribel remained standing at her window. The streetlights were coming on now, one by one, like little beacons in the growing darkness. She thought about Talia Monroe, probably sitting in that library right now, feeling the same fear and confusion that had once threatened to overwhelm Maribel herself. Not this time, Maribel whispered to her reflection in the window. Not again. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospice windows as Maribel walked down the now familiar corridor. Her footsteps echoed against the vinyl flooring, each step heavy with purpose. The weight of Laverne's phone call from the previous night still pressed on her mind. When she entered Walter's room, She found him sitting up in bed, looking slightly better than during their emotional meeting the day before. A half-eaten breakfast tray sat on the rolling table beside him, and soft classical music played from a small radio on the windowsill. "Miss Ainsworth," Walter said, his face brightening with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Maribel pulled the visitor's chair closer to his bed and sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Grisham, something's happened that I need to discuss with you." Walter's expression shifted, concern creasing his weathered face. "Is everything all right?" "No," Maribel said quietly. "Last night, I learned about a nursing student named Talia Monroe. She's being pushed out of her training program right now." She paused, watching Walter's face carefully. "The circumstances, they're exactly like what happened to me." The color drained from Walter's face. He looked down at his hands, thin and pale against the white hospital blanket. "I see," he whispered. "The same system that failed me is still in place, isn't it?" Maribel's voice was gentle but firm. Nothing was ever changed. Walter's shoulders slumped, and he seemed to age 10 years in front of her eyes. "No," he admitted. I never corrected the system. I knew it was flawed, but making changes would have meant explaining why. There would have been questions, investigations." His voice trailed off. "People would have found out about what happened with my case." Maribel finished for him. "Yes." Walter's voice cracked. "I was a coward. Again. I told myself that what happened to you was a one-time mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. I convinced myself that protecting the institution's reputation was more important than fixing the broken process." Maribel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the hospital garden below. A few patients in wheelchairs were enjoying the morning sunshine. "Mr. Grisham, yesterday I forgave you for what happened to me, and I meant it." She turned back to face him. "But now there's another young woman whose future is at risk because of the same broken system." "Please," Walter begged, his voice trembling. "Please don't pursue this. The scandal would damage so many reputations. Good. People who had nothing to do with any of this would be hurt. Their careers, their lives." Tears welled in his eyes. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please, let it rest." Maribel felt her throat tighten. The peace she'd found yesterday through forgiveness now warred with a deep sense of moral responsibility. She thought of herself at 21, watching her dreams crumble without understanding why. She thought of Talia Monroe, probably experiencing that same confusion and helplessness right now. "How can I know what I know and do nothing?" she asked softly. "How can I let another person go through what I went through? Sometimes peace means accepting that we can't right every wrong." Walter said, "You've found healing. Isn't that enough?" Maribel walked back to her chair and sat down heavily. "But my healing came through truth, Mr. Grisham. Through you finally being honest about what happened. Doesn't Talia deserve that same truth?" Walter's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. "The institution has procedures, protocols. They're not perfect, but they serve a purpose. Going public now would undermine the entire system. Maybe that system needs to be undermined." Maribel said quietly. "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen." "You don't understand the ripple effects this could have," Walter pleaded. "Careers built over decades could be destroyed. The reputation of the entire program could be damaged beyond repair." Maribel felt tears prick at her own eyes. "I do understand. That's what makes this so hard." She reached out and touched Walter's hand gently. "Yesterday, you showed me what courage looks like by finally telling the truth. You gave me back a piece of myself that I thought I'd lost forever. But now I have to decide if I can live with myself knowing that same harm is happening to someone else." The room fell silent, except for the soft classical music still playing by the window. Walter closed his eyes, his face etched with pain that seemed both physical and spiritual. Maribel sat quietly, feeling the weight of two competing truths: the healing power of forgiveness and the moral obligation to prevent harm to others. "The peace we found yesterday," Walter finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It meant everything to me. I've carried this guilt for so long. Your forgiveness—" He opened his eyes, and they were filled with tears. "I don't want that peace destroyed by scandal and public shame." "Neither do I," Maribel admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing peace for justice. Sometimes healing isn't just about what makes us feel better. It's about making sure others don't have to go through the same pain." Walter turned his face towards the window, and Maribel could see the internal struggle written in every line of his expression. She felt it too. The tension between honoring the grace of forgiveness and answering the call to protect others from harm. Yesterday's emotional resolution now felt complicated by new moral questions that had no easy answers. The evening sun cast long shadows across the modest apartment complex where Talia Monroe lived. Maribel stood at the door of Unit 14B, her hand hesitating before knocking. The peeling paint and worn welcome mat reminded her of her own student housing from years ago. After 3 sharp knocks, the door opened slowly. Talia Monroe stood in the doorway, looking smaller somehow than she had at the hospital. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she wore an oversized sweater that seemed to swallow her whole. "Ms. Ainsworth?" Talia's voice cracked slightly. "Laverne said you might come by." "Please call me Maribel." She offered a gentle smile. "May I come in?" Talia nodded and stepped aside. The apartment was neat but sparse. Textbooks stacked on a coffee table, nursing scrubs hanging to dry on a rack by the window, and a few potted plants struggling to survive on the windowsill. A half-eaten bowl of ramen sat forgotten on the counter. "I'm sorry it's not much," Talia said, quickly gathering some papers from the only chair in the living room. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's perfect," Maribel assured her, taking the offered seat while Talia perched on the edge of her futon. "I remember what it's like being a student. Every spare dollar goes to books and supplies." Talia's shoulders relaxed slightly at the understanding in Maribel's voice. "Laverne mentioned you wanted to talk about what happened with the program." Maribel leaned forward, her eyes soft but direct. "Only if you feel comfortable sharing. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who might understand." Tears welled up in Talia's eyes almost immediately. "I just don't understand what I did wrong," she whispered. "One day everything was fine, and the next—" She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "They said there was a complaint, that I had been unprofessional with a patient, but they won't tell me which patient or what I supposedly did." The words hit Maribel like a physical blow. Her own memories surfaced, the same vague accusations, the same wall of silence, the same helpless confusion. "They told me I have to leave the program," Talia continued, her voice shaking. 3 years of work, all my savings, my student loans, all of it for nothing. And I don't even know why." Maribel's hands clenched in her lap as she watched Talia struggle to maintain composure. The young woman's pain was so raw, so familiar. It was like looking into a mirror of her own past. "The worst part is feeling so alone," Talia admitted, pulling her knees up to her chest. "My family doesn't understand. They think I must have done something wrong or they wouldn't be kicking me out. But I didn't. I know I didn't." "I believe you," Maribel said firmly, the words she had needed to hear herself all those years ago. Talia looked up, surprise and relief washing over her face. "You do?" "Yes." Maribel took a deep breath. Because almost the exact same thing happened to me 12 years ago. The story poured out of her then. The scholarship, the false complaint, the loss of her future. As she spoke, she watched understanding dawn in Talia's eyes, followed by anger on her behalf. "But that's not fair," Talia exclaimed. "How could they just... without any proof? The system was broken then," Maribel said quietly. "And it seems it's still broken now." "What did you do?" Talia asked, leaning forward. "How did you fight it?" The question hung heavy in the air. Maribel felt shame crawl up her throat as she admitted, "I didn't. I was too scared, too confused. I just left." Silence filled the small apartment. Outside, a car alarm went off briefly before being silenced. The sun had set completely now, leaving them in the dim glow of a single lamp. "I lost everything I'd worked for," Talia whispered, tears falling freely now. "My whole future." Maribel stood up and moved to sit beside Talia on the futon. Without hesitation, she wrapped an arm around the young woman's shoulders. Talia turned and sobbed into Maribel's shoulder, years younger than her, but carrying the same weight of unjust accusation. As she held Talia, Maribel felt something shift inside her. The peace she'd found in forgiving Walter Grisham suddenly felt hollow. What good was personal closure if the same broken system continued to hurt others? Her forgiveness had been genuine, but it wasn't enough. She thought of Walter Grisham in his hospital bed, begging her to let it go, to protect reputations and avoid scandal. She thought of her own years of silence, of moving on and building a different life. But sitting here with Talia, feeling the young woman's tears soaking into her shoulder, Maribel knew she couldn't walk away this time. "Listen to me," she said softly, waiting until Talia looked up. "You're not alone in this anymore. What happened to you? What happened to both of us? It wasn't right. And it can't keep happening to others. But what can we do?" Talia asked, wiping her eyes. "They have all the power." Maribel straightened her shoulders, feeling strength flow through her. "Not anymore. I have proof now. I have Walter Grisham's confession about how the system failed. And I have your story. So similar to mine, it can't be coincidence." "You'd really help me?" Hope flickered in Talia's eyes for the first time that evening. "Yes," Maribel said firmly. "It's not enough to find peace with my own past if I let the same injustice continue. Sometimes being truly at peace means standing up and fighting for what's right." Talia grabbed Maribel's hand and squeezed it tight. In that moment, Maribel felt the last traces of her hesitation fade away. She had chosen forgiveness yesterday, but today she chose justice. The two weren't mutually exclusive. She could hold both in her heart. What she couldn't do was remain silent any longer. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Maribel's small home office as she spread documents across her desk. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through years of paperwork she'd kept tucked away in a filing cabinet. Correspondence, forms, and official notices that had changed the course of her life. She had never been able to throw them away, though looking at them still made her stomach tighten. Taking a deep breath, she carefully placed each document into a manila folder. The familiar ache in her chest felt different now. It wasn't just about her anymore. Talia Monroe's tearful face from the previous evening kept appearing in her mind, overlapping with memories of her own younger self. "This stops now," she whispered, straightening her shoulders. At 9 o'clock sharp, Maribel walked into the county legal aid office, clutching her folder of documents. The reception area was busy but orderly, with motivational posters on the walls and pamphlets about various legal services neatly arranged on small tables. "I have an appointment with Corinne Patel," Maribel told the receptionist, trying to keep her voice steady. A few minutes later, a woman in her early 40s appeared, wearing a navy blazer and a warm smile. "Ms. Ainsworth, I'm Corinne Patel. Please come with me." Corinne's office was small but welcoming, with a potted plant in the corner and family photos on her desk. She gestured for Maribel to take a seat and settled behind her desk with an attentive expression. "Thank you for seeing me," Maribel began, opening her folder with careful movements. "I need help with something that happened years ago, but it's happening again to someone else now." "Take your time," Corinne said gently. "Start from the beginning." Maribel pulled out the documents one by one, laying them on Corinne's desk as she explained her story. Her voice grew stronger as she described the false accusations, the lack of due process, and the devastating consequences. When she reached Talia's situation, Corinne was already taking detailed notes. "The same administrator who handled your case, he's admitted to mishandling it?" Corinne asked, leaning forward. "Yes." Maribel nodded. "Walter Grisham. He's in hospice care now, and he confessed everything to me. But he doesn't want me to pursue it because he's worried about reputations being damaged." Corinne's pen moved quickly across her legal pad. "And you have reason to believe the same flawed process is being used against this nursing student, Talia Monroe?" "The similarities are striking," Maribel said, pulling out more papers. "Look at these notices. They're almost identical, right down to the wording. No proper investigation, no chance to defend herself, just quiet pressure to leave the program." Corinne studied the documents carefully, occasionally making notes. After several minutes, she looked up with a serious expression. "Ms. Ainsworth, what I'm seeing here shows clear violations of administrative procedure in both cases. The lack of documentation, the failure to follow established protocols for investigation, the denial of due process. These are significant issues." Maribel twisted her hands in her lap. "Can anything be done? Mr. Grisham begged me not to pursue this." "Listen," Corinne said, her voice gentle but firm. "This isn't about destroying anyone's reputation. This is about correcting a systemic problem that's hurting people. We can handle this in a way that focuses on policy reform rather than personal attacks." Relief flooded through Maribel. "Really? How?" Corinne pulled out a fresh legal pad. "First, we document everything thoroughly. Mr. Grisham's admission is actually helpful. It establishes a pattern of procedural failures. We can use that to push for policy changes without necessarily making his confession public." "What about Talia?" Maribel asked. "She's going through this right now." "We can file an immediate appeal on her behalf," Corinne explained, writing quickly. "The evidence of similar mishandling in your case strengthens her position considerably. We'll request an external review of both cases." Maribel leaned forward. What would that mean exactly? "It means we push for an independent committee to examine how these situations were handled. We focus on the process, not the people. The goal is to implement proper procedures and safeguards to prevent this from happening to anyone else." Hope began to rise in Maribel's chest. "So we can help Talia without necessarily causing a scandal?" "Exactly." Corinne smiled. "Sometimes the threat of exposure is more effective than exposure itself. Once the administration realizes we have documentation of repeated procedural violations, they'll be motivated to make changes quietly." "That feels right," Maribel said slowly. "I don't want revenge. I just want to make sure no one else goes through what I did." "That's exactly the approach we want to take." Corinne began outlining steps on her legal pad. "We'll start by drafting a formal letter requesting review of both cases, citing specific procedural violations. We'll make it clear that our goal is reform, not publicity." As they worked through the details, Maribel felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be purposeful. Her past pain could become a force for positive change. "There's one more thing," Corinne said, looking up from her notes. Your willingness to come forward, to use your experience to help someone else, that's brave. It matters. Maribel blinked back sudden tears. I just couldn't stay quiet, not when I saw it happening again. That's how real change happens. Corinne said warmly. One person deciding to speak up, to stand firm, to say, this isn't right. She gathered the documents into neat piles. Are you ready to take this step? Maribel straightened in her chair and nodded. Yes, whatever it takes to make this right. They spent the next hour organizing documents and outlining their strategy. Corinne's calm competence and clear vision helped settle Maribel's nerves. This wasn't about revenge or exposure, it was about correction and prevention. They would proceed carefully, firmly, and with purpose. As they wrapped up their meeting, Maribel felt both exhausted and energized. The familiar documents that had once represented only pain now felt like tools for change. She had spent years carrying the weight of injustice alone. Now, finally, that burden would serve a greater purpose. The morning sun filtered through the hospice window as Maribel stepped into Walter Grisham's room. Her heart was pounding, but her steps were steady. The documentation from Corinne Patel felt heavy in her leather bag, like stones weighing down her shoulder. Walter was propped up in bed, looking frailer than during their previous visits. His thin hands rested on the white blanket, and his eyes brightened with recognition when he saw her. Maribel, he said softly, I wasn't expecting you. Today. She pulled the visitor's chair closer to his bed and sat down, taking a deep breath. Mr. Grisham, I need to talk to you about something important. Her voice was gentle but firm, carrying the quiet strength she'd found within herself. Walter's expression shifted, sensing the seriousness in her tone. What is it? I've learned about a student named Talia Monroe. Maribel began, watching his face carefully. She's going through exactly what I went through. The same broken system, the same lack of due process, the same silence. She paused, letting the words sink in. And she's not the only one. There could be others we don't know about. Walter's face crumpled, the weight of understanding visible in every line. His hands began to tremble. Oh, God, he whispered. It's still happening? Yes, Maribel said softly, and I can't stay quiet anymore, not when I know others are being hurt the same way. Tears welled up in Walter's eyes, spilling onto his hollow cheeks. I understand, he said, his voice breaking. But the scandal, the damage to the institution. Maribel reached out and gently took his hand. It felt paper-thin and cold in hers. Mr. Grisham, I've met with a legal aid advocate. There's a way to address this that focuses on fixing the system, not destroying people. But we need your help. Walter's whole body seemed to shake with suppressed emotion. I've spent years hiding from this, he confessed. Years trying to convince myself it wasn't as bad as I knew it was, that my negligence didn't really hurt anyone. He looked directly into Maribel's eyes. But seeing you here, knowing what it cost you, and now learning about this young woman, it's not too late to make it right. Maribel said quietly. You've already taken the first step by telling me the truth. Now we can work together to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Walter closed his eyes, tears still flowing. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and his ragged breathing. When he opened his eyes again, something had changed in them, a resignation, but also a relief. What do you need from me? He asked. Maribel reached into her bag and pulled out 2 documents. The first is a consent form allowing the release of confidential information related to my case and the procedural failures that occurred. The second is a formal statement acknowledging what happened and recommending specific changes to prevent it from happening again. Her hands were steady as she placed the papers on the mobile tray table and swung it over his bed. "You don't have to do this," she added softly, "but it would help ensure real change happens." Walter's hands shook as he reached for the papers, but his voice was stronger when he spoke. "No, you're right. I do have to do this. I've carried this burden long enough, and so have you." He began to read through the documents carefully. Halfway through, he looked up at Maribel with tears in his eyes. "You're being more merciful than I deserve," he said. "This statement, it protects the institution while still requiring change. It acknowledges the harm without seeking revenge." "That's not what this is about," Maribel replied. "It's about fixing what's broken so others don't get hurt. It's about transformation, not punishment." Walter nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with a tissue. "You've become the kind of person I should have been," he said quietly. "Someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard." He picked up the pen Maribel offered, his hand trembling, but his signature clear and deliberate on both documents. As he finished, his whole body seemed to relax, as if a great weight had lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, handing the papers back to Maribel. "I know it doesn't fix what happened to you, but knowing that some good might come from it, that others might be spared because you had the courage to speak up." His voice broke again. "We're doing this together," Maribel reminded him, carefully storing the signed documents in her bag. "Your courage matters too." Walter reached for her hand again, holding it tightly despite his weakness. "I've been so afraid of the truth coming out," he admitted. "But now that it is, I feel free, like I can finally face whatever comes next with a clear conscience." Maribel squeezed his hand gently. "Sometimes the truth hurts," she said softly, "but it's the only way to heal." They sat together in comfortable silence for a few moments, both feeling the weight of what had just happened. The morning sun had grown stronger, filling the room with warm light that seemed to reflect the clarity they'd found together. Maribel sat quietly in the hospital board conference room, her hands folded neatly in her lap to hide their slight trembling. The long mahogany table stretched before her, surrounded by serious faces, studying the documents spread across its polished surface. Afternoon, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the thick carpet. Dr. Regina Walsh, the board chairwoman, cleared her throat and adjusted her reading glasses. "Ms. Ainsworth, the evidence you and Ms. Patel have presented is both thorough and deeply concerning." She glanced at the other board members, who nodded gravely. "Mr. Grisham's written statement in particular provides clear confirmation of administrative oversights that caused significant harm." Corinne Patel, sitting beside Maribel, leaned forward slightly. "We appreciate the board's willingness to address these matters privately first," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Our goal has always been correction, not controversy." Talia Monroe sat on Maribel's other side, hands twisted nervously in the fabric of her skirt. Maribel reached over and gave the young woman's hand a gentle squeeze of reassurance. The gesture reminded her of Laverne's similar kindness just weeks ago, when the mysterious packages had first appeared. "After reviewing all materials," Dr. Walsh continued, "the board has reached several decisions." She lifted a document and began reading formally. "First, Ms. Monroe's expulsion is immediately reversed. She will be reinstated to the nursing program with a clean academic record and an extension to complete any missed coursework." Talia's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. Tears welled in her eyes as she gripped Maribel's hand tighter. "Second," Dr. Walsh went on, We will issue formal corrections to Ms. Ainsworth's academic records from 2012. While we cannot undo the lost opportunities, we can ensure the record reflects the truth." She paused, making direct eye contact with Maribel. "We deeply regret the impact this had on your educational and professional path." Maribel felt an unexpected wave of emotion rise in her throat. After so many years of carrying the weight of unspoken injustice, hearing it acknowledged officially was overwhelming. She blinked rapidly, maintaining her composure. "Third, effective immediately, we are implementing new administrative policies." Dr. Walsh gestured to a thick folder. "These changes include mandatory review panels for all disciplinary actions, clear documentation requirements, and an appeals process with independent oversight. No single administrator will have unilateral power to impact a student's academic standing." The board members began signing various documents, passing papers down the table with quiet efficiency. Maribel watched as years of hurt were addressed in neat black ink and official letterhead. "Ms. Patel," Dr. Walsh said, "your office will receive copies of all documentation within 24 hours. We appreciate your discretion in handling this matter internally first." Corinne nodded professionally. "My client's primary concern was always correction and prevention, not publicity. You've addressed both admirably." After the meeting concluded, Maribel, Talia, and Corinne gathered in the hospital garden. The late afternoon sun painted everything in warm, golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Talia wiped her eyes for what seemed like the 100th time. "I can't believe it's really fixed," she said. "I was so scared my whole future was ruined. Now you can focus on becoming the excellent nurse you're meant to be," Maribel said softly, thinking of how different her own path might have been with similar support years ago. Corinne gathered her briefcase and smiled. This is exactly how these situations should be handled, with dignity, fairness, and a focus on making things right. She touched Maribel's shoulder. "Your courage in coming forward not only helped Talia, but it will protect countless future students." Later that evening, Maribel drove to the hospice center. Walter Grisham was awake, propped up on pillows and looking out the window. His face brightened with recognition when she entered. "It's done," she said simply, settling into the chair beside his bed. "The board reviewed everything today. They're making all the changes we hoped for." Walter's eyes filled with tears. "Without scandal? Without damage to the institution?" Maribel nodded. "Justice doesn't always need a spotlight to work. Sometimes it just needs honest people willing to do the right thing." "Thank you," Walter whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For showing more wisdom than I did. For finding a way to fix things without destroying people in the process. We all have chances to make things right," Maribel said gently. "It's never too late to choose a better path." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set, casting warm colors across the room. Maribel felt a profound sense of peace, not just from forgiveness given, but from using her pain to prevent others from suffering the same fate. The system that had once silently wounded her would now protect future students, and that knowledge felt like a healing balm on old scars. "I'll bring those strawberry candies next time I visit," she said, standing to leave. Walter smiled, understanding the gesture for what it was. Not just a sweet treat, but a symbol of how pain could be transformed into something better, something healing. As Maribel walked through the hospital corridors, she passed Talia speaking excitedly with her nursing instructor, already planning how to catch up on missed classes. The sight made her smile. Sometimes justice worked quietly, changing lives not with dramatic revelations, but with careful corrections and thoughtful reforms. It wasn't about revenge or public shame. It was about making things right, one person at a time. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight filtering through the windows of Maribel's bedroom as she straightened her black dress in the mirror. Her phone buzzed with a text from Laverne. Walter Grisham had passed quietly in his sleep overnight. Maribel's hands trembled slightly as she set the phone down, a complex wave of emotions washing over her. "Thank you for finding your peace?" She whispered to no one in particular, touching the necklace that now held new meaning around her neck. The past week had been a whirlwind of activity. The hospital board's review had moved swiftly, resulting in significant changes. Talia Monroe was back in the nursing program, her record cleared. Policy reforms were being implemented to prevent similar injustices. And most importantly to Maribel, her own academic record had finally been corrected after all these years. Walter had lived just long enough to see it all made right. During their last visit 3 days ago, he had been weak but clear-minded, his thin face peaceful as he'd held her hand. "You gave me such a gift," he had whispered, "the chance to fix what I broke. God bless you for your forgiveness, Maribel." Now, as Maribel drove to the small chapel where the memorial service would be held, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. Those mysterious packages that had once caused such fear now felt like stepping stones on a path to healing. Not just for her, but for others too. The chapel parking lot held only a handful of cars. Walter hadn't had much family left, just a niece from out of state who had handled the arrangements. As Maribel walked through the heavy wooden doors, she was struck by the peaceful quiet inside, broken only by soft organ music. Simple flower arrangements flanked a framed photo of Walter from his younger days. He was smiling in the picture, his eyes bright and kind. Maribel studied it, trying to reconcile this image with both the frail man she'd known and the faceless administrator who had once altered the course of her life. "You must be Maribel," a gentle voice said beside her. She turned to see a woman about her age, with Walter's same warm eyes. "I'm Sarah, Walter's niece. He told me so much about you in his final days." Maribel smiled softly. "He spoke of you too. I'm so sorry for your loss." Sarah touched her arm. "Thank you for coming. And thank you for what you did for him. Uncle Walter carried that guilt for so long. Being able to make things right at the end, it meant everything to him." More people filtered in, mostly former colleagues and a few other family members. The service was simple, but touching. Sarah spoke about Walter's dedication to education and his deep sense of responsibility to his students. A former co-worker shared memories of Walter's kindness and integrity. When the minister invited others to share remembrances, Maribel found herself standing, drawn by an impulse she hadn't expected. Her voice was steady as she spoke. "I came to know Walter only recently, but in that short time, he taught me something profound about courage and redemption. He showed me that it's never too late to acknowledge our mistakes and try to make things right. His humility and his sincere desire to prevent others from being hurt, that's a legacy worth honoring." After the service, as people gathered in small groups to share memories and condolences, Maribel slipped outside into the chapel's small garden. She sat on a wooden bench, listening to birds singing in the crepe myrtle trees. The anger that had lived in her heart for so long was gone, replaced by something gentler. A quiet gratitude for the chance to find closure, to help someone else heal, and to turn past pain into positive change. Sarah found her there a little while later, holding a small gift bag. "Uncle Walter asked me to give you this after he was gone." She handed it to Maribel with a sad smile. "He wrapped it himself last week." Inside, Maribel found a simple journal bound in soft leather. A note was tucked inside the cover in Walter's shaky handwriting. "Dear Maribel, when I was young, Someone wise told me that writing helps us make sense of life's hardest moments. I hope you'll use this to tell your story. Not just the hard parts, but the healing too. You helped me find my way to peace. Perhaps your words will help someone else find theirs. With deepest gratitude, Walter. Tears blurred Maribel's vision as she ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover. She thought of Talia Monroe and how sharing her own story had helped prevent history from repeating itself. Maybe Walter was right. Maybe there was more healing to be done through words. The garden was quiet now, the late morning sun warming her face. In her mind, she could still see Walter's peaceful expression during their last visit, could feel the gentle squeeze of his hand as they'd prayed together. The memory no longer brought pain or resentment, just a profound appreciation for the mysterious ways that grace could work in human hearts. Sarah sat beside her on the bench. He was so grateful for you, you know. Said you taught him that forgiveness isn't just about erasing the past, it's about creating a better future. Maribel nodded, clutching the journal to her chest. He taught me the same thing. Together they sat in companionable silence, watching butterflies dance among the flowers. The morning breeze carried the sweet scent of jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. It felt like a blessing, like a gentle reminder that even the hardest journeys could lead to moments of grace. The morning sun streamed through Maribel's kitchen window as she sorted through her mail, the gentle warmth touching her shoulders like a comforting embrace. Her fingers paused on a pale blue envelope, the handwriting neat and precise. The return address made her heart skip. It was from Talia Monroe. Settling into her favorite chair by the window, Maribel carefully opened the envelope. The scent of lavender wafted up. Talia must have spritzed the paper with perfume. A small smile tugged at her lips as she unfolded the letter. Dear Maribel, the letter began. I've started and rewritten this letter so many times, trying to find the right words to thank you. But maybe simple is best. You changed my life. When everything felt hopeless and I thought my dreams were over, you stepped forward and fought for the truth. Maribel's vision blurred slightly as she continued reading. Talia described returning to her nursing program, how her classmates had welcomed her back with open arms, and how her instructors now treated her with newfound respect. The day I put my uniform back on, Talia wrote, I cried happy tears. Every time I walk those hospital halls now, I hold my head high. You taught me that sometimes justice just needs a steady voice and a brave heart. The morning light caught the small crystal cross hanging in Maribel's window, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the pages in her hands. She thought back to those intense weeks, confronting the hospital board, working with Corinne to document everything, those final conversations with Walter before he passed. The weight of those moments felt different now, transformed from burden to blessing. Talia's letter continued, But you gave me more than just my career back. You showed me what real courage looks like. Not the loud, showy kind, but the quiet strength that stands up for what's right, even when it's hard. I keep thinking about how you chose to help me, even though you could have just walked away. You turned your own pain into purpose, and that inspires me every single day. Maribel reached for her coffee, taking a slow sip as memories washed over her. The young woman she'd been years ago, confused and heartbroken, watching her dreams slip away. She remembered the silence that had followed, the way she'd carried that hurt like a shadow. But now, those memories had lost their sting. In their place was a gentle peace, knowing that something good had finally grown from that painful soil. The new policies they've put in place are already making a difference, Talia wrote. Last week, another student had a complaint filed against her, but this time everything was handled properly. Full documentation, fair hearing, proper representation. When I saw that happening, I thought of you and Mr. Grisham. How your courage created real change. It's like ripples in a pond, touching lives you'll never even know about. Setting the letter in her lap for a moment, Maribel glanced at the small photo she'd placed on her bookshelf, a picture from Walter's memorial service. It had been a simple gathering, just family and a few close friends, but the peace on his face in those final days had touched her deeply. He'd found his own kind of freedom in telling the truth, in making things right. Turning back to the letter, she read Talia's closing words. I start my pediatric rotation next month, my dream specialty. Every time I help a child, every time I make a difference, it'll be because you helped make it possible. Thank you for showing me that hope is stronger than fear, and that it's never too late for truth to heal old wounds. With deepest gratitude and love, Talia. Maribel folded the letter carefully and held it against her heart for a moment. The morning light seemed brighter somehow, more golden. She thought about the person she'd become through all of this. Stronger, yes, but also more tender-hearted. The forgiveness she'd offered Walter hadn't erased the past, but it had transformed it into something meaningful, something that could help others. Standing up, she walked to her little home office where she kept a special box. Inside were the items that had started this whole journey: the strawberry candy wrapper, the CD, the velvet jewelry box with the necklace. But now they felt less like painful reminders and more like stepping stones that had led her to this place of purpose. She added Talia's letter to the box, smoothing it carefully. These weren't just mementos of the past anymore. They were pieces of a larger story about healing, about choosing light over darkness, about the quiet power of standing up for what's right. Looking out her window at the spring flowers blooming in her small garden, Maribel felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. The weight of old injustice no longer pressed on her shoulders. Instead, she felt light, free to move forward with new purpose. Her faith, tested but unbroken, had grown deeper through it all, teaching her that even the hardest experiences could be transformed into something beautiful when touched by compassion and truth. She picked up her phone and sent a quick text to Laverne. Just got the most beautiful letter from Talia. Want to meet for coffee? My heart is so full. Within moments, Laverne replied with an enthusiastic yes and a string of heart emojis that made Maribel laugh out loud. The morning stretched before her, bright with possibility. She had reports to file at work later, a community garden meeting in the evening, and lunch plans with Corinne to discuss volunteering at the legal aid clinic. Her life had expanded in ways she never expected, filled now with meaningful connections and opportunities to help others. Maribel touched the cross necklace she wore, not the one from her past, but a new one she'd bought herself to mark this chapter of her life. It reminded her daily that healing wasn't just about moving beyond pain. It was about transforming it into something that could light the way for others. The morning breeze carried the scent of jasmine through her window, and Maribel smiled, feeling truly at peace. She was no longer the woman who carried silent wounds, nor was she defined by what had been taken from her. Instead, she had become someone who understood the power of speaking truth with compassion, of choosing courage over comfort, of letting love heal what hurt had broken. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.